The empire of Ankama Games has flown relatively under the radar in America compared to its popularity in France. Sure, every now and then at a video game convention you may see something related to Ankama like Crossmaster or Dofus, but asking most Americans if they know what Dofus or Wakfu is would probably go something like this.
What the f is this? I don't know.
Wakfu is a free-to-play tactical turn-based MMORPG that takes place in the world of Dofus 1,000 years later, serving as a sequel game. The original Dofus released all the way back in 2004-2005, while Wakfu released a little over 10 years ago on February 29, 2012. Both games play very similarly, with another incarnation of the Dofus world called Waven coming out in a few weeks. In the next couple videos, we will be covering the Ankama MMORPGs, starting with Wakfu. After putting a decent amount of time into the game learning its combat, trying out its various classes, joining a guild, completing group content, and exploring its world, how do I feel about the vibrant world of Wakfu? Here are my thoughts. So the story of Wakfu takes place 1,000 years after the events of Dofus. The original main villain is Ogrist, a giant ogre who collected all of the Dofus eggs, which are essentially like Dragon Balls. Ogrist collected the eggs for a lover, the lover broke his heart, and then he killed her. He then climbs a mountain and cries for 1,000 years. Yep, that's the storyline of Wakfu. Obviously, they added onto the story later on, but legitimately, that is Wakfu's vanilla storyline. Moving on to character creation, there is quite a number of character classes to choose from, all of them with strange names that will probably confuse new and veteran MMO players, so I'll do my best to summarize what each class is. Starting from the top, we have Cross Range, the Archer, Ekaflip's Coin, the Gambling Warriors, Sakrier's Blood, the Berserker, Masquerader, the Stance-Shifting Soldier, Sram's Shadow, the Assassin, Ujinok's Rage, the Barbarian, Iop's Heart, the Vanilla Warrior, Enripsa's Hands, the Healer, Theka's Shield, the Protector, Sedita's Shoe, the Druid, Unatroph's Fingers, the Treasure Hunter, Iliotrope's Portal, the Teleporting Fighter, Foggernots, the Mechanic, Huppermage, the Wizard, Zeller's Sandglass, the Time Mage, Osamoda's Whip, the Summoner, Pandoa's Pint, the Drunken Warrior, and finally the Rogue, otherwise known as the Rogue.
Nice.
Yeah, lots of weird class names, but the variety adds a ton of unique ways to play. In terms of actually customizing how your character looks, though, that's pretty much all relegated to the cash shop, since Wakfu is a free-to-play MMORPG after all, but more on the cash shop in a bit. Once you create your character, you play a short tutorial that teaches you all the basics, such as movement, interacting with the world, and then the bread and butter of Wakfu, the combat. Combat begins sort of like any other single-player RPG. You will see enemies on the overworld that you can walk up to and initiate combat with. Doing so starts a positioning phase where you can choose where you'll begin combat. And if you haven't noticed, combat is turn-based. That's right, like I said early on in the video, Wakfu is a tactical turn-based MMORPG, similar to games like Final Fantasy Tactics or Mario Rabbids. Instead of a tab target combat system or an active action combat system, it's done on a grid with players taking turns positioning themselves, slinging spells and abilities. And trust me, combat is actually a lot more engaging than you would think. There is a lot more to it than it looks. This is important too because Wakfu, if I'm being honest, can be a pretty tough game. Learning the ins and outs of combat becomes pretty integral the further along you get. That means discovering combos, discovering the best positions, moving for best offense or defense. It's a delicate game of intelligence that rewards those who play smart, but by no means is it so incredibly hard that a newbie can't just jump in and have fun. The biggest obstacle players will most likely have have will be finding a class that best suits their playstyle. With the plethora of classes available all with varying playstyles, it can be a bit of trial and error before you find something you like best, with class builds and leveling up further augmenting the way each class plays. Wakfu's classes all have a variety of spells and abilities you learn as you level up, each with corresponding elements of earth, wind, water, fire, and neutral. Leveling up rewards you with characteristic points that can be spent in various trees. This is where you can increase your maximum health, defense, critical chance, damage, movement, and so on. To summarize it, you can customize each class to a certain extent to a way you like to play, whether it be with higher health, more damage, or melee versus ranged. And that's not even covering the abilities you can change in your hotbar, along with passive perks to further augment your playstyle. Of course, there is also equipment, which also adds extra stat points, which is rewarded from dungeon content, questing, or completing achievements. Oh, and did we mention that the maximum level in Wakfu is over 200? So you'll have a metric ton of time to theory craft different builds. Overall, there is quite a bit of customization when it comes to building your character, and if you feel lost, don't worry. The community has plenty of guides out there to help follow if you want to streamline your experience rather than experiment. However, if you are more of a solo player, Wakfu has you covered as well. Much of the game's content is solo friendly, especially with the allies system. Allies work a bit like trusts from Final Fantasy XI. They are a friendly companion character that you can add to your party that is controlled by you rather than another player. So if you are struggling to find a group or just want to tackle something by yourself, you can do so. Other features include crafting, achievements, a player-owned housing system, and PvP. Crafting in this game sort of works like RuneScape. You have your various gathering professions, which include farmer, fisherman, herbalist, lumberjack, miner, and trapper. The refining professions include armorer, baker, chef, handyman, jeweler, leather dealer, tailor, and weapons master. It works pretty much like how you would think. Collect resources from a spot and then take said materials to a workbench where you can craft various items like armor, rings, weapons, or food. Player-owned housing through the Haven bag is pretty standard to other MMORPGs. Once you unlock the Haven bag, you can enter it from the main menu. From here, you can decorate your space, invite players to it, sell items, or listen to the game's music. The player-owned housing isn't overly complex, but its simplicity isn't a bad thing. It is sort of weird that most players you run across, though, when exploring, will just be sitting in their Haven bag selling items, so it makes the game seem a lot less populated. If you are a competitive player, there is achievements, leaderboards, and PvP. Achievements in Wakfu award great chunks of experience as well as titles, items, and equipment. For PvE, there is of course endgame dungeons as well as leaderboards for challenges for each and every dungeon in the game. First off, there is a lot of dungeons in Wakfu, with each one having scalable difficulty and challenges. The leaderboards for dungeons are ranked like a speedrun, where players can compete to see how fast they complete each dungeon in terms of how few combat turns it took to complete it. For how many dungeons there are in the game, it can be a fun competitive side to shoot for in Wakfu in terms of PvE. PvP, however, is in a weird spot. Apparently, in the early days of Wakfu, there was world PvP where players could attack others and compete for resources. However, PvP has been relegated to battlefield maps that are only available on certain days or friendly PvP arenas where you can duel other players. Once again, like other MMORPGs, unfortunately, if you are looking for a solid PvP experience here, Wakfu sadly doesn't have it currently. Players are hoping for a return to form for PvP in Wakfu, but at least at the time of this video, it's either in battlefields or the Ekaflip arenas, and of course dueling other players in cities. So yeah, another game that's ignored its PvP community.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
Of course, there is questing that will give you some incentive to explore and discover little secrets, which can unlock emotes, more titles, or in general just give more chunks of experience to help level you up. Luckily, the questing in Wakfu is actually quite charming with the game's sense of humor. Almost every cutscene has some sort of joke or comedic slapstick in it. At times it can feel like you are playing a children's game, but then there will be references of beer or smoking. It's odd, but honestly I like it. Nations are also a feature within Wakfu. Taking notes from other MMORPGs with player-ran governments, nations are led by players. The nations offer little bonuses like extra resources and such, which is nice if you are trying to improve your professions. There also used to be open world PvP content with nations, but as far as I know, that's all been moved to the battlefields, which is a shame considering faction PvP is rather fun when done right. Wakfu's community is a largely friendly one, probably because Wakfu is Ankama's lesser populated MMORPG. Dofus has quite a number of servers to choose from, all with varying levels of population, while Wakfu literally only has 2. One is dedicated to the French players of the game, which is Ankama's main audience, and one is an international server, which ironically still has more non-English speaking players than English. However, I can say the players you will meet who speak the same language will all largely be very friendly and very helpful. Joining a newbie-friendly guild is probably one of the best first steps a newer player should take if they plan to really dive into the world of Wakfu. In general, the game has a lot of care and love obviously put into it. The graphics are simple, but they have a great aesthetic to them if you love 2D animation. Characters all have an amazing amount of character and life to them. It almost reminds me of the Legend of Zelda Wind Waker's 2D looks in terms of the cartoon feel. Music to me is pretty basic, but both Dofus and Wakfu don't have an incredibly bombastic tune that keeps my toes tapping, at least in my opinion. What is composed here is still fitting to the world of Wakfu and is by no means bad, it's just not memorable in my opinion. The final section, as always, is the cash shop and monetization.
Well, about time for me to be hitting the old dusty trail.
Well, wait a minute, it's not that bad. Ankama has done a decent job at keeping the game away from fully pay-to-win systems, with items in their cash shop actually being relatively cheap and not crazy expensive. First off is the subscription, or booster as it's called in Wakfu. At about $7 a month, you get slightly more experience, drops, money, and other perks, like being able to respec your character at all times or playing multiple tunes simultaneously. Playing multiple tunes is sort of like multi-boxing in WoW or EverQuest, except here, you are just getting the benefit of leveling all your alts at once versus playing them separately, which sounds crazy good, but remember you can also just use a sidekick companion to help when playing solo. The cash shop pretty much has all the usual suspects. You have the staples such as class-changing items, name changers, experience boosters, and cosmetics. Arguably, the biggest item that can be debated as pay-to-win is the Kama Stone, a tradable item that can be used to gain cash shop currency called Ogrins. The stone is similar to WoW tokens or RuneScape bonds. It's an item that can be purchased for real money and then traded to players for in-game currency, allowing free-to-play players to earn cash shop items without paying real money. But honestly, for how cheap the game's subscription or cash shop items are, it's not like you'll be burning a hole in your pocket to keep your subscription active. Either way, the fact that you can earn subscription status or other cash shop items is nice. For what Wakfu is, it's actually weird to see it not at least be popular with players who liked classic MapleStory or anime MMORPGs from the early 2000s. Steam charts show that the game is in the low 200s in terms of population metrics, at least for those who play from Steam. There is a quality game here, but I wonder if it's just from the lack of marketing that has kept the game so under the radar, or just general lack of interest. A quick fun fact is that Square Enix actually initially published the game in North America during its inception and was then taken back by Ankama only a year or so after. There was quite a push of YouTube coverage on the game, but in general, it just didn't get any sort of major buzz, even with Square backing it. Let's get to my final thoughts on the game though, before it sounds like I'm being overly negative. Wakfu and really all of the Ankama games are great for lovers of turn-based tactical RPGs. If you love games like Final Fantasy Tactics, Fire Emblem, or heck, really any tactics game, this is a game for you. The game has quite a lot of class variety in its 18 distinct classes. You have roles from healer, tank, DPS, control, and support, with many of the classes being able to take on multiple roles. All it takes is for you to find one you like and stick with it. I don't know about you, but I've always liked the 2D aesthetic, and Wakfu has beautiful environments and character design. It doesn't have the issue of outdated 3D graphics because the art style it has is timeless. The game is fully free to play, with all areas of the game being accessible. There is a subscription booster available for those who do wish to support the game, but honestly, I never felt the need to actually purchase this subscription. I was fully able to enjoy Wakfu, and I never felt pressured into spending any money on it. Finally, the game has a very dedicated and passionate community behind it that is very welcoming. Whether you are a solo player or someone who is looking for a community to join, Wakfu has a pleasant group of people playing. Now, personally, I'm a fan of turn-based combat and RPGs. After all, some of my favorite games are Final Fantasy, Shin Megami Tensei, and so on, but I can understand it's not for everyone. Most MMO players probably enjoy a balance of action tab target combat versus the slow, methodical turn-based systems. As I unfortunately brought up earlier in the video, PvP doesn't have a lot of content to participate with in Wakfu, which is so odd because it's not like Ankama shies away from competitive play. Ankama has plenty of other games that are pure PvP or have PvP content to participate in, so it was just a bit jarring to learn that Wakfu heavily dialed back its PvP. For us English-speaking players, it's not necessarily a negative, but much of the population does not speak English, even on the international server. I'm coming from an angle of an English-speaking person, so sometimes I felt a language barrier during my gameplay experience, but there is English-speaking players out there, just in a minority. Finally, while the population is rather friendly, the game has a rather low population in general. Luckily, you don't need a ton of players to participate in dungeon content or content in general, but just know there isn't a huge community of players in Wakfu like there is in other mainstream MMORPGs. That's a wrap on Wakfu. Next, we will be taking a look at the original Ankama MMORPG Dofus and how it holds up today in 2023. In terms of Wakfu, let me know in the comment section below if you have played Wakfu or if you've been on the fence about it. If you want to support the channel, subscribe for more content and like the video to get Wakfu some of the attention it deserves. Follow all of my social media down in the links below in the description, and I hope to see you in my next video. Take care, everyone.